Hey everybody, it's Michael from Replica Airguns with another tabletop review for you today. The long-awaited review for the Umarex Colt Single Action Army Shell Loading BB Revolver. So this is the Colt Peacemaker Historic Revolver. And I do have two different versions here. I have the nickel version and the blued version. So it's nice that I can show you both of these finishes. Now on camera, they may not look exactly like they will in person. So I'll try and describe the finish a little bit. The nickel version isn't as shiny or reflective, I'd say. It is lighter in color. Definitely, you can see that it's lighter, but it has more of a satin finish in a way, so it's not quite as reflective. Whereas this blued version is darker, yet has sort of a more, I wouldn't say mirror-like finish, but a little bit more reflective finish. So it's not as satin, it's not diffusing the light quite as much. And you do see fingerprints on both of these guns, but even more so on the blued one. So, you know, it's just the way it is. But the blued one it is a lot lighter in color than I thought it would be, but it still has that blued look. So it is, I wouldn't call it black, it's definitely more of a blued finish. Both of these pistols have the imitation bone or what have you, well maybe it's ivory grips on them. So let's get into the specifications for both of these pistols. They're pretty much all metal design guns. They both have 4.5 inch smoothbore barrels. They both use 12 gram CO2 cartridges. They shoot 4.5 millimeter steel BBs. Now I did try lead BBs out using these revolvers, or at least one of the revolvers in my field test, so check that out. And I'll talk a little bit about it in this review, but not too much. Just when we get to the target accuracy portion, I'll mention it a little bit. They have a 6-round cylinder with removable brass dummy shells, and we'll take a look at those in a bit. They weigh 2.1 pounds or 953 grams, and they shoot in single action only, of course, since they're the Single Action Army revolvers. They have a claimed FPS of 410 feet per second, and they're Colt licensed. Now again, they are replicas of the Colt Single Action Army revolver. Hopefully you can see it on there. Well, it's harder to see on this one, but there you see it there, right on this guy. You'll see it a little bit better. Colt Single Action Army 45. Keep in mind that .45, we'll talk about that in terms of the shells as well. I did want to mention the 45 caliber when it comes to the dummy shells at some point during this review here. Now they're distributed by Umarex and they're made in Taiwan. They do both come in nice boxes. The nickel one here has the nickel photograph there. Okay. See here, 410 FPS, steel BB, 12 gram, single action. We'll take a look at the blued version. You'll see it's kind of just black in the picture. It's hard to capture the actual finish in just a basic picture, right? So it's kind of difficult. Some of the specifications here. Alright. They do have safeties. I'll show you that later. The real one wouldn't have had a safety, but they have made it very discreet. Okay. All that information. Okay. Quickly look at the manual here that comes in the box. Not going to spend a lot of time. Comes in multiple languages. So there's your safety. You can kind of see it there on the bottom. We'll show it to you in person in a bit. So I'm just basically talking about some of the parts on the gun. Alright, here we have how to load the CO2, how to use the hammer, how to load the shells into the gun, how to load BBs into the shells. Okay, how to sight the gun in. Right? How to clean it. And some disclaimers and things and warranty information, stuff like that. And then we get into the French, so we're not going to go into that part. At this point I want to do a couple comparisons to a few other revolvers I have here. Now obviously these guns are kind of the same, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the nickel one out for a second here. Other than finish, they're identical. And let's bring in an old, basically an old Crossman. This guy was back in the 70s or I believe late 60s. And it's basically a Single Action Army air revolver. Now the CO2 goes up here. You can see it goes in right in this part of the gun. A little different. Doesn't go in the handle. Okay. Just light this up a little bit. Got a plane going over, but nothing I can do about that. It does load from the front, and it's 22 caliber pellets. They wouldn't be moving too fast, but maybe one day I'll test this gun out. Kind of an old classic. I haven't really reviewed it so much. Maybe one day I will. But it's a Single Action Army pistol, and again 22 caliber. This is the Crossman. Okay, so here 22 caliber. All right, has a nice bone handle. Cool gun, but you can't get these anymore. Obviously, they stopped production on these way back. But that's pretty much the closest I have in terms of an air gun that would come close to this new Single Action Army from Umarex. Now I also have this guy here, and this is a blank gun. Okay, and it shoots 380 caliber blanks or 9mm blanks, the sort of the crimped version ones, right? And it's actually not front firing. It comes, all the blast comes out of this area. That's why it's kind of a little bit mangled in there. But it's a Single Action Army gun. Now this one does spin like that. That's the way they're supposed to do it. But it doesn't ratchet as nice as these guys do. I'll show you that in a bit. Next up, I want to show you the Dan Wesson here. This is a shell loading revolver, and basically the cylinder swings out. You can load these shells with a speed loader, but they're very similar shells. I'll show you them in a bit. And this guy basically is the more modern version of the today's sort of revolver. This would be like a 357 revolver. It would shoot in both double and single action, right? So pretty cool, and just a more modern gun. CO2 goes in the grip, right? Watch the review for my Dan Wesson revolvers. They come in airsoft and BB version and even pellet versions. All right, let's move back to the Colt Single Action Armies by Umarex. All right, let's do a little bit of a walk around. I think I'm going to show you the blued version just because I think it'll film a little bit better. It's not quite as bright, so it should film a little better. So let's take a look at the left side. Or see, here we have Colt Single Action Army on the barrel. Okay, we have basically a patent number there. Okay, got the Colt licensing. Let's take a look around. Now this is where the CO2 would go. Okay, CO2 goes in there, and the nice thing is you've got the Allen key right here, so you're never going to lose that. Pretty cool. Just pop it in the top like that, press it in. Now I want to show you this ratcheting. I just love the way it ratchets, just like a real Single Action Army would. And the trigger is just, now watch this trigger. There's no take up at all. There it is. Basically about 1 point something pounds, and it's just, there it is. It's a gorgeous trigger, just like you'd find on a real Single Action Army pistol. There's your Colt, caliber, serial number. Unfortunately, we have this ugly writing on the barrel. Now it doesn't show up as much on this one, so if that's a concern, maybe get the nickel version. Okay, there you have license trademark of New Colt Holding Corp. There's your safety. Alright, get it off of there. Sometimes I think you have to actually, it's almost like you have to I've noticed this on these guns. When it's in safe, sometimes, there you go, you have to work the action a little bit to get it back into fire. Now we can get it into there, but sometimes it's a little bit, if it's a little bit stuck in a position on you, then you have to kind of move this around or open the breech there. I guess you call it the breech. Maybe work the action to get it in or out of safe, or in safe, out of safe, so to speak. So there's the front of the shells. Let's take a look at a shell. Actually, let's do this. So we're going to half cock it, and that's how you rotate the cylinder. You put it in the half cock, open the breech there, and you can use these guide rods here, these little rods, to eject them if you want to. Should work. There it is. And they fall out on the floor. Or you can just simply use gravity, because the reason you'd have that rod is if it was a real brass shell using gunpowder, it might expand a little bit and get tight in the cylinder, and you'd have to actually force it out with the extractor there, with the rod extractor. Okay. So what I do like about these shells, and I'm going to show you a little different here. Here's a Dan Wesson shell. Here's the Umarex Colt shell. Now, the BB goes in the front on the Dan Wesson, and it goes in the back on the Colt Single Action Army. Okay, and there's a couple neat things about that. It creates, I believe, a longer area for the CO2 to expand because you're getting a little bit longer barrel essentially. Okay, the other thing it does is allows for loading right there. You can just put a BB in, rotate it, put a BB in. You don't have to remove them, and it worked fine. I used it that way many times. It worked just fine. So now I have tried steel BBs and I have tried lead BBs. The problem with the lead BBs is they're a little bit large, so they're about 4.7 maybe millimeter versus 4.5, and at some once in a while they'll get stuck in the front of the shell. Now you might be able to maybe just kind of use a little bit of sandpaper in there and make that a little wider, but that's where it would get stuck right at the end of the shell there, and sometimes it just wouldn't come out. The lead BBs work pretty good, but they were a good 100 feet per second slower than the steel BBs. They proved to be somewhat accurate as well. So we'll take a look at the target in a second for those guys. I didn't show you this, basically all around this gun, but let's just finish that up. So there is your rear sight, just a notch, front post. Okay, nice recessed barrel. Now I will quickly just show you around this guy just so you can get another look at it. The finish and everything. Very, very nice guns. Alright, let's talk a little bit about the performance. I have done a full field test shooting review. I've actually done several reviews. I have a chronograph review, I have a target review, so basically one just to go over feet per second performance using different types of shells, different types of ammunition. I also have an accuracy review, and I just have one where I was just shooting this gun at targets, so there's basically already 3 shooting videos out there that I've made. So check those out, I'll put links in for those videos. Now, talking briefly about the feet per second performance, I did get right around 400 feet per second using the BBs, the steel BBs. Umarex says you'll get about 410, so you know I was getting right around there, that's for sure. When I tried out the lead BBs using the Umarex shells, I got just under 300, kind of closer to 270 FPS using the heavier lead BBs. Now in terms of accuracy, I'm going to show you the steel BB target first here, and you can watch that video, but if you look at this target, all 5 rounds were in about a 2-inch group. They just kind of spread out a little this way. So if they'd come in a little tighter this way, I would have got a tighter group, but I went a little bit left, a little bit right. Pretty well centered, you know, this way, a little bit high, but not too bad. Now the sights are non-adjustable, so take that into consideration when you're shooting this gun. You might have to adjust your sight picture just slightly, aim a little higher, a little low. Now you see the lead BBs came in a little bit better or from side to side, but they spread out this way, and the reason for that is because the lead BBs don't seem to be, in terms of velocity, as consistent. So some will come out a little faster, some will come out a little slower. They move around a lot in terms of velocity, so the faster BBs will hit high, the slower BBs will hit low. So if they were more consistent, they would have come tighter this way and got a nicer, more accurate grouping. So there's potential there for the lead BBs to work a little bit better in terms of accuracy. So if perhaps you could maybe work with your shells and get the BBs to go through the shells a little bit smoother, or maybe use a slightly lesser diameter lead BB, then you could potentially get lead BBs to work a little better. I did already mention the triggers. These triggers on these guns are just absolutely gorgeous. The hammer action and the trigger are beautiful. Now you won't get that spinny, you won't get that rotation spin like you do with this guy. The reason for that is because the inner barrel actually compresses against the cylinder just a little bit. You can see it right there, and it actually moves. It moves kind of in and out. I don't know if you can see that. It moves in and out to create a tighter fit. So that's going to slow this down. It's just not going to spin. So that's just the way that is. It's just to get a better seal, so that the CO2 works better with the BBs. You get higher FPS. But in terms of, you know, cocking the gun, you really don't feel it too much. It feels great. The trigger is just gorgeous. It's one of the best triggers I've ever shot. Beautiful gun. Alright, let's talk about some of the pros and the cons. Well, finally, we have a current production single action army revolver. It's been a long time. Pretty much since Crosman made their single action army pellet revolvers way back when. These revolvers, they look amazing. They're a super accurate replica of the real steel Old West versions. They have recessed barrels, of course. They have great weight and feel in the hand at about 2.1 pounds. I love the shell loading design that loads from the back, so no need to remove the shells if you don't wish to. But you can if you want to, it's up to you. The hammer and trigger action is about perfect. Literally no take up at all, very crisp and super light. The finish on both the nickel and blued versions are very nice, as you can see. I like the very well concealed CO2 with the built-in Allen key and the super discreet safety located right on the bottom there. It's not too obvious. I guess Umarex wanted to have a safety. That's probably the best place they could have really put it to keep it kind of hidden as much as possible. Now in terms of cons, that warning instruction on the right side of the barrel, like me, many people comment about that. They're not really big fans of it, but here in North America it seems to be possibly a regulation, and most of the airgun companies, here in North America at least, so Canada, the US, will have warning instructions somewhere on the gun, and a lot of times it's white on black, not too discreet, it doesn't look so good. Now if you're in other parts of the world, you may not have those warning instructions on your version of the exact same pistol. It just depends where you're located, but here in North America, unfortunately, it does exist on a lot of guns. I didn't mention it too much, but in terms of the actual caliber of this pistol, so if this were a real steel pistol, it would shoot a 45 cal round. So in other words, it would be quite large. Now the shells that we have in these guns are actually closer to a 357 or a 38, which is kind of like a 9mm in size. 9mm, 380, 357, all about the same diameter, very close. So looking at 45 versus 38, quite a difference, okay? So that's not exactly true. It would be nice if perhaps the shells were a little bit larger to conform to the 45 cal version of this pistol. That said, perhaps the manufacturer of these guns was basically just using existing shells or something already there on the market to be able to place in these guns. So at least we have shell loading or dummy shells for these guns, and that's a big thing. You know, yeah, they're not 45, they're more like 38, but that's okay. One thing I did notice when I shot this gun, and you might notice in the shooting videos, is that they're super quiet. I mean, they're really not very loud at all, which is kind of telling me that maybe not a lot of CO2 is being used. Yes, you're going to get more shots per CO2, but there's more potential for higher power. So I'm thinking maybe a little bit more CO2 coming through that valve would get these up into the 490s or at least the high 400s. And I think it would just be a little bit more fun. The gun would be a little bit snappier, have a little bit more volume to it, make the experience of shooting these guns just a little bit better. So maybe a higher power version at some point would be kind of cool. Really not too much negative stuff to say about this gun in general. I really had to look for things to find in terms of cons. Overall, I really love this pistol. Make sure to check out again my other shooting videos. I got 3 of them for you. Also come on down to replicairguns.com where I'll have articles, post reviews for these pistols with a lot of pictures and different things like that. And of course we have our Canada and US online replica airgun stores where we sell air guns, BB guns, pellet guns, airsoft guns, blank guns, knives, and other accessories. And yes, we do have these guns available for sale. I believe in both stores at this time, for sure in Canada. Alright, thanks for watching another Replica Airguns video. Until next time, take care.